There is a creature in this world who has never lost a battle, not because he is the largest, nor the fastest, nor the fiercest. He has won every war ever waged against him with nothing more than a cracked shell and a stubborn smile. Listen now and let the old river tell you how it all began. Long before the rivers had names and the tallest pines had learned to whisper, there lived a turtle on the warm southern bank of a slow and ancient stream. The water moved like a dreaming elder there, unhurried and silver in the afternoon light, and Turtle spent his mornings exactly where the sun fell hottest on the smooth flat stones at the water's edge. His shell in those early days was a marvel of the world, a single seamless dome of deep forest green, polished as still water itself, curved and perfect as the sky at the moment before dawn. Every creature who passed by that riverbank could not help but pause and admire it. Turtle admired it most of all. He would stretch his wrinkled neck over the lip of the bank and gaze down at his reflection for long, slow stretches of the morning, watching the way the light moved across his shell like oil on glass. He was beautiful, and he knew it. But beauty, as the old stones know, is a restless companion. It is a fire that warms the chest one moment and consumes it the next. Turtle wanted more than to be admired. He wanted to be feared. He wanted to be the kind of creature whose name made the tall grasses bend with dread, whose shadow on the trail made deer freeze and wolves step sideways. He wanted to be a warrior, and not merely a warrior, but the greatest the forest had ever seen. On a morning when the mist still clung to the cattails and the herons had not yet made their first pass over the water, Turtle climbed to the top of a moss-covered log that jutted out over the bank like a throne awaiting its proper king. He filled his small lungs with the cold river air, puffed out his chest until his shell gleamed in the early light, and declared war on every large animal in the valley. His voice was not what he hoped it would be. It came out less like the roar of a storm and more like the creak of a branch in a light wind. But Turtle paid that no mind. He announced his warpath with the full gravity of an ancient chief, proclaiming that he would march into the deep forest and challenge every bear, every elk, every wolf who dared stand in his path. Then he climbed down from his log and began his preparations. He whittled a tiny club from a knob of driftwood, smooth on one end and knobbed on the other. He cut a round shield from a dried piece of bark, no wider than a large lily pad, and painted it with red clay. He tied a band of braided river grass around his head. He looked, to any creature watching from the ferns, like a very small, very serious mistake. But Turtle did not look at himself through the eyes of other creatures. He looked at himself through the eyes of the legend he was about to become. He had not marched half a meadow's length before the forest floor trembled beneath a familiar and enormous weight. Bear came first, crashing through the elderberry at the trail's edge with the casual destruction of a creature who has never needed to apologize to anything. Wolf appeared a breath later, silver and lean, materializing from the shadow between two oaks like smoke given the shape of hunger. They both looked down at Turtle with the same slow, tilting curiosity a hawk gives a beetle who has climbed to the highest point of a fence post. Then Bear laughed. It was not a small laugh. It rolled out of him like thunder rolling down a hillside, bouncing off the old maples and startling a family of sparrows out of a pine 40 paces away. Wolf did not laugh as large, but his grin was wider, quieter, the kind that carries more weight than noise. Bear bent low and pressed a single enormous claw against Turtle's painted bark shield, nudging it so that Turtle stumbled backward 3 small steps. "You," Bear said, the word warm with disbelief. "A warrior." Turtle planted his feet. He straightened the band of braided grass around his head. He looked up at Bear the way a mountain looks at rain, as though the weather were simply not its concern. "Laugh now," Turtle said evenly. "The old stories never begin with the ending." The forest trail wound north through a grove of old birch trees, whose pale bark peeled in long curling strips like the pages of an unread book. Turtle marched through it with his club over one shoulder and his bark shield hanging from one foreleg, and for a time he felt very much the way a warrior ought to feel. His claws made a satisfying sound on the dry, packed earth. The wind moved through the birch leaves in a way that sounded almost like applause. But the sun climbed higher, and the trail stretched longer, and somewhere inside Turtle's chest, a deep and irresistible heaviness began to settle. It was the kind of tiredness that does not ask permission. It arrived the way evening arrives, gradually and then entirely. And before Turtle had traveled a distance that would have taken a deer no more than a dozen strides, he found himself standing at the edge of a great heap of dry autumn leaves, piled deep against the base of a red oak, golden and rust and amber in the slanted afternoon light, and they looked to Turtle like the most inviting bed the world had ever arranged. A great warrior, he reasoned to himself with the authority of someone who has just discovered a very convenient truth, must conserve his strength. Strategy lives in patience. Rest is the sharpening of the blade. He set down his club. He folded his bark shield neatly against the root of the oak. He crawled into the center of the leaf pile with the thoroughness of a creature intending a very serious nap. And within 3 slow breaths, he was entirely invisible, entirely warm, and entirely asleep in the middle of the most heavily used hunting trail in the valley. The hunter came from the eastern village, a young man light on his feet with a long bow of polished yew across his back and a quiver of straight-fletched arrows at his hip. He was following the trail of a large deer, reading the story the ground told him in bent grass and overturned soil, moving fast and quiet the way hunters move when the trail is fresh and the light is good. The pile of autumn leaves meant nothing to him. It was autumn. The trail was full of leaves. He ran through that warm, rustling heap with the easy confidence of a man who has run this trail 100 times, and his right foot came down directly on the center of Turtle's shell with its full running weight. What happened next unfolded the way disasters unfold in forests, which is to say with absolute indifference to anyone's intentions. Turtle's shell was hard and smooth and curved, a surface no human foot was designed to trust, and the hunter's foot shot forward as if the ground itself had yanked it. His arms flew wide. His bow spun free. The whole length of him went briefly, magnificently airborne in a way that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. And then he crashed backward into a dense wall of briar that the trail curved around at that particular bend. And the briars accepted him the way briars accept everything, which is to say, without any gentleness at all. Silence held the trail for one long suspended moment. Then the hunter scrambled upright with the frantic energy of a man who has been attacked by the invisible, thorns pulling at his tunic and blood rising in a dozen thin lines across his forearms. He looked at the trail. He saw nothing. No trap, no stone, no root. Whatever had struck him had left no mark on the world. The forest breathed around him unchanged. A jay called once from somewhere deep in the birch grove, and then went quiet. The hunter was a brave man in the ordinary ways that hunters are brave, steady in the cold, patient in the long waiting hours, unafraid of wolves or distance or weather. But he was a man of his world, and his world had taught him that the things you cannot see are the things most worth fearing. He left his bow where it had fallen. He left the deer trail and the afternoon light and the familiar bend of that path, and he ran back toward the eastern village with a speed born entirely of the imagination. Turtle woke to the departing thunder of running feet and blinked at the pale autumn light filtering through the disturbed leaves. He crawled free of the pile slowly and looked at the polished yew-bow lying in the middle of the trail, still rocking faintly from the force of its landing. He looked at the empty trail north and the empty trail south. He looked at his own small, undamaged, extraordinarily well-polished shell. Then he raised his tiny driftwood club above his head and said, to no one and to the entire forest equally, I have defeated the strongest hunter in the valley. Word moved through the forest the way all remarkable things move, which is faster than the creatures carrying it expect and with more embellishment than the original facts require. By the time the story reached Bear, it had grown several details that Turtle himself would not have recognized, and every one of them made Turtle sound considerably more dangerous than a sleeping reptile in a leaf pile. Bear had lived a long time in that forest. He had earned his reputation across many seasons and through encounters with creatures far more visibly threatening than Turtle. And pride, for Bear, was not a small or decorative thing. It was structural, the way a spine is structural. The story of Turtle and the hunter was not merely amusing to Bear. It was a stone dropped into still water, and the rings it sent outward touched him in a place he did not enjoy being touched. He found Turtle on the old log by the riverbank, examining his shell in the afternoon light with his usual satisfaction. Bear came through the willow screen at the water's edge like weather arriving without announcement. It was luck, Bear said, and the words carried all the weight he intended. The whole forest is laughing at a story about a sleeping turtle and a frightened man, and somehow your name is in it where a warrior's ought to be. I will end this confusion right now. He raised one enormous foot above Turtle's smooth and gleaming shell. Turtle looked up at that raised foot, the way the earth looks up at clouds, with patience and with absolute certainty about what comes next. Then he pulled his head inward, tucked his 4 legs close against his body, and disappeared entirely inside his shell. Bear brought his full weight down. The sound it made was not the sound of victory. It was deeper than that, a compression of the world, the kind of force that moves through solid things and leaves a record. Turtle's shell was old material, laid down over slow generations, hardened by seasons too numerous to count, and it did not shatter the way a clay pot shatters, all at once and into dust. Instead, it did something far more complicated. It held, and then it cracked. A single fracture line appeared across the dome of that beautiful seamless green, and then another branched from it, and another from that one, spreading outward in all directions in the way that ice cracks when pressed from above, in a pattern that was strangely, almost unbearably beautiful if you were far enough away from it to appreciate the geometry. The pieces did not fall. Turtle's skin held them together from beneath, every fragment still in place. The whole shell, still a shield, still a home, but mapped now with 100 fine lines that had never been there before. Bear's foot hurt. It hurt considerably, in the way that force returned through a surface harder than expected always hurts, radiating upward through the bone with a complaint that would last several days. Bear stepped back and looked at what he had done, and what he had done looked back at him through the gaps in the willow screen where the afternoon light came through in long, pale needles. The head emerged first, slow and deliberate, pushing up through the cracked shell the way a seedling pushes up through late winter ground, unhurried, inevitable. Turtle's eyes found Bear's across the distance between them with the clarity of a creature who has already decided how this moment ends. Then Turtle smiled. It was not a small smile. It occupied his entire face with the serene confidence of a river that has just been told it flows the wrong direction. He rotated his head slowly to look at the web of fracture lines mapped across his shell, taking in the full pattern with the careful appreciation of an elder studying a map of ancient territory. "Thank you, Bear," he said, and his voice carried the particular warmth of someone who means exactly what they say and has had time to prepare it. That shell had grown too tight around me. I could feel the edges. I needed the room. He looked at each crack in turn, and his expression was the expression of someone looking at old wounds that have become, with time and perspective, a record of everything they survived. Look at these lines. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? Every one of them is a battle won. Bear stood very still. The forest around them had gone completely quiet, the way it goes quiet when something is happening that the trees want to remember. Bear was not a creature given easily to fear, but there is a particular kind of fear that has nothing to do with claws or size or the threat of pain. The fear of something that cannot be broken in the way you understand breaking. He turned around. He walked back through the willow screen, and then, with considerably more speed than his arrival had suggested him capable of, he was gone. Spring came late that year, as it sometimes does in old places, and with it came the warming of the river stones and the return of the long afternoons that Turtle loved. He sat by the slow water with a piece of bark stripped from a young pine, working pine sap into the cracks of his shell with the careful attention of a craftsman who respects the material he is working with. The sap was amber and fragrant, and it filled each fracture line with a warmth that hardened slowly in the cool air, settling into every crack the way meaning settles into experience when enough time has passed. The shell it produced was not the shell Turtle had been born with. It was heavier now, more complex, marked by its history in a way that smooth and perfect things are never marked. The animals came, one at a time, and then in small gathered groups, drawn by the story that had continued to grow in the telling until it had become something the forest could not quite hold. They came, and they watched, and none of them, not the wolves, nor the deer, nor the foxes who knew better than most the difference between danger and theater, none of them stepped onto the log where Turtle sat. Wolf came last, as Wolf always does, sitting at a careful distance with the long-considered respect of a creature who has revised its understanding of something. Turtle set down his bark and looked out at the water and at his reflection. Still there, still steady, still his. The shell that looked back at him was cracked and mended and cracked and mended, mapped with the amber lines of every blow it had absorbed and outlasted. He found it, on the whole, considerably more interesting than what he had been born with. True strength is not about having an unbroken shield. It is about having the wit to smile when it cracks. The oldest lessons wear the quietest faces. Turtle never set out to become a legend by suffering. He became a legend by refusing to treat suffering as defeat. When Bear crushed what Turtle had spent his whole life polishing, Turtle understood something that many creatures spend entire lifetimes trying to learn, that the shell was never the point. The spirit inside it was the point. Every crack you carry is a record of something you were strong enough to survive. Vanity protects nothing. Wit and resilience protect everything. If this story found you at the end of a long day and gave you even a small measure of peace, leave a word in the comments below and let this corner of the forest grow. Your likes carry these old stories further than you might imagine. And if you would like to listen without interruption, ad-free versions of every story in this series are waiting for you on Patreon and Spotify. Rest well. The river is still there. It has been there the whole time.